Hola, estudiantes. So today we're going to take a look at irregular preterite tense verbs. So specifically, we're going to look into spelling change verbs, slipper verbs, I to Y verbs, and stem change verbs. So first off, this is going to be a lot of information. So you want to make sure that you have really practiced up on regular verbs and how those work. But let's go ahead and get into these irregular verbs. So first up, spelling change verbs. So in the present tense, we learned that spelling change verbs take place in the yo conjugation. You just have to memorize that conjugation. Well, good news in the preterite tense, for the most part, there are some pretty good reasons for why we have spelling changes. So with buscar, for example. So again, that verb is buscar. So that C is making a k sound. What we want to do is take off our AR, replace it with A. The problem with this comes with the sound that C makes when it has an E after it. So this word would not be busque. CE sounds like say. So this is busse. So the issue is when we want to keep that k sound with like what we had with CAR, but we need to change that A to an E, every time we are going to change that to QUE. And again, that's in order to keep the sound. So let's change that BUSQUE, busque. And then the rest of the conjugations are just going to be what we think they should be. Buscaste, buscó, buscamos, buscastes, and buscaron. All right, next up, GAR verbs. Similar story. So the verb here is pagar. So that G makes a G sound. When we take off the AR and replace it with our A, GE sounds like hey, not gay. I want it to be pagay to come from pagar. So again, anytime we're changing GA to GE, but we want to keep the G sound, we are going to change it to GUE. So let's change that up, pagay. And then again, everything else, we'll just use the endings that we have memorized. Pagaste, pagó, pagamos, pagastes, pagaron. All right, so those two make pretty good sense. Now, empezar, it's a little bit different. But again, what we want to do is take off that AR, replace it with that E with the accent. And theoretically, that would be sort of okay, I guess. But in Spanish, we do not like ZE. It's actually difficult for me to write ZE. So it's just a thing we just don't like it in Spanish. So again, anytime we're changing ZA to ZE, we are going to change it to CE. And that should look familiar. That is what you do when you make nouns plural that end in a Z. So if you have a word like lápiz or pez, and you want to make those plural, instead of ZES, you write CES. So it's the exact same thing, and the reasoning is the same. We just don't like ZE. So let's change that, empecé with a C. And then the rest of our conjugations are going to go back to what we knew before. I'm not going to write all of those conjugations down, but the rest of them will end with a Z. All right, so those are spelling change verbs. Anytime you have a verb ends in CAR, GAR, or ZAR, that will be the case, and you will change that yo conjugation. Let's move on to slipper verbs. So this is a brand new thing for you guys. So this applies only to IR verbs. So you're not going to see this for AR verbs or ER verbs. So that's good news. But the requirement here is that you really know your stem change verbs, and specifically those IR stem change verbs really, really well. So an example of a stem change verb that is an IR verb in the present tense is the verb dormir, so to sleep. And in the present tense, that's an O-T-U-E verb, and we're seeing that represented here. Anytime we have a stem change verb, it's what's called a boot verb, or sometimes you'll hear that called a shoe verb or even a sock verb. But it's always those four conjugations. So we have changed that O in the stem to UE for those four conjugations. So the story is anytime it is an IR verb with a stem change in the present tense, it is also going to have what is sometimes a different stem change in the preterit tense. So we have three examples here. We have a verb dormir, which is O-T-U-E in the present tense. We saw that up here. We have preferir in the present tense. It is an E to IE stem change verb. And then the verb pedir in the present tense is an E to I stem change verb. So this is going to not be a boot verb. It is not going to be the four conjugations that we changed for dormir in the present tense. It's a slipper verb, which means the bottom two conjugations are always going to have that stem change. The catch is that stem change does sometimes change from the present tense to the preterite. So for dormir, where the yo conjugation is duermo, we're seeing that ue. Again, it's these bottom two conjugations, but instead of o to ue in the preterite tense, it is o to u. Then with preferir, it's the same idea. The bottom two conjugations are going to have a stem change. Now in the present tense, the yo conjugation is prefiero. So it's E to IE in the present tense. In the preterite tense, it is just E to I. And then our last example here, an E to I verb in the present tense, the yo conjugation for pedir is pido, and that is E to I in the present. Good news, in the preterite, it is still E to I. And again, though, it says bottom two conjugations. That's what makes it a slipper verb. The bottom two are different. So I do want to recommend that you take a look at the full list of slipper verbs listed in Chapter 18. There are several. In that chapter, it's called Los Verbos Irregulares en el Preterito. That just means irregular verbs in the preterite tense. So it has a good list of everything we're learning in this chapter with these irregulars. So let's move on to some I to Y verbs. So these are interesting. Just some basic information about Spanish and some spelling stuff. We have a problem with this I sandwich. We don't like E-I-O, O-I-O, U-I-O, E-I-E, O-I-E, U-I-E. We don't like it. Similar to we don't like Z-E. So similar story, anytime that that's going to be a thing, we are going to change that I to a Y. So with creer, this conjugation, for example, it would be C-R-E-I-O, but we don't like that. We have that I sandwich, so we change that I to a Y. So same thing with creyeron. It was going to be E-I-E, so we changed it to E-Y-E. So this is going to remind you a little bit of slipper verbs because the bottom two conjugations are the ones that are affected. Same thing with leer, to read. Leyo, it would be L-E-I-O. So we changed that to a Y. Same thing with leyeron. Oír, we did the same thing. It would be O-I-O and O-I-E-R-O-N. So we changed those two Ys. So it's similar to slipper verbs there because you are changing something. Now the extra thing with these I to Y verbs, you have some extra accents. These I's all need accents. And the reason for that is we want to hear that E sound. So we don't want this to be creiste, we want it to be creiste. So because we want to hear that E, we are going to make sure that we have accents on all of those I's. It is always on the I's there, so that makes it easier to remember. So those are I to Y verbs. Let's move on to our last set of irregular verbs, and these are our stem change verbs. So with your stem change verbs, we do something really interesting. So we're going to take our AR verb endings and our ER verb endings. We're going to kind of use some from each of those sections to come up with a third set of endings. So in the present tense, you learned AR verb endings, ER verb endings, and IR verb endings. In the preterite tense, it's like you have list number 1, that's AR verb endings. You have list number 2, which is ER and IR verb endings. And then we have list number 3, which is stem change verb endings. So we do have to memorize a third set. And it's kind of like I said, we take some from AR, some from the ER and IR. So you take that A, you take iste, we take O, we take imos istes and dieron. But there are no accents on that third set. So make sure that you're noticing that, no accents. And then we'll talk about this J-E-R-O-N toward the end here. So let's take a look at what this means for us. So it is stem change verbs. So that means in addition to memorizing this third set of endings, we also have to memorize some new stems. So a lot of memorization when it comes to irregular preterite verbs. So let's take a look at these. I have them just grouped into sets that are similar. So andar, estar, and tener. They all have that UV in there that we just kind of added in. It seems like from nowhere, but we just have to memorize that stem. So anduv, and then we're going to add set 3 of those verb endings. So we ended up with anduve, anduviste, anduvo, anduvimos, anduvistes, and anduvieron. Same thing with estar. We memorize estuve, and then we have those endings on there. And then tener, if you have memorized estar, then it's the same thing. You just take off the es. So tuve, tuviste, and so on. So those 3 are similar. And then we have poder, poner, and saber. And these are all similar because they have U's in them. But it's the same thing. We have to memorize those 3 stems, and then we just add stem change endings on there, that third set of endings that we've memorized. Then these 3 are similar, hacer, querer, and venir, and they're similar because they have this I in here. The one extra thing with hacer, though, is iso. And I do want to explain why we do this. If we just took the stem that we've memorized, HIC, and the ending is an O, remember CO sounds like co, but the verb, the stem is is. So we want it to sound like iso, not eco. So because of that, we want to keep that spelling. We are going to change that C to a Z there. So be careful with that. And then let's take a look at these J stems. So tra, di, conduh, and traduh. So with these specific stems, the ones that end in a J, we learned that we had our third set of verb endings, a, iste, o, imos, istes. And then with the previous stem change verbs, the ending for ustedes, ellos, and ellas was ieron. But you'll notice with these, there is no I. So for the ones that end in J, it will just be eron.